This was a justifiable homicide committed by the officers in their own self-defense. This is not to say that there are not significant tactical and strategic issues that are involved. Clearly there are. But our function in looking at this case is to make sure that we have every bit of evidence that's available, and I think we've done a pretty good job in that respect.
District Attorney Kamp said a total of 12 shots were fired. The shots were fired in rapid succession. The rapidity of the firing precludes there being any time within which the officers may have realized that she no longer had the knife or no longer posed a threat.
The overwhelming weight of the evidence in this case indicates that she was throwing a knife, a 11-inch boning knife at them that was life-threatening. And if you read the Calgic instructions, which I believe are attached to the material that you have, you'll see what the instructions say, and they have right to use reasonable force when they're faced with life-endangering kinds of activity. And here, you have a threat of death, and they have a right to use self-defense in behalf of themselves or on the behalf of another.
There were 10 eyewitnesses to the shooting of the 39-year-old woman outside her home on South Orchard Avenue in South Los Angeles. The house is run down and deserted today. Tall grass has overrun the yard. The screen is off the gas meter outside of the house. This is where Mrs. Eula Love stood the day the shooting took place. There was an officer here, an officer there. She held a knife in her hand. There was a scuffle. The knife was knocked out of her hand. She reached for it, and as she threw it, the officers opened fire.
Shooting, Mrs. Blue and Mr. Thomas observed the incident from their residence, which is one house. He was interviewed by investigator Farmers. He said the white officer, Officer O'Callahan,
District Attorney Kamp said a total of 12 shots were fired. The shots were fired in rapid succession. The rapidity of the firing precludes there being any time within which the officers may have realized that she is no longer... Pick up again. District Attorney Kamp said a total of 12 shots were fired. The shots were fired in rapid succession. The rapidity of the firing precludes there being any time within which the officers may have realized that she is no longer... Pick up again.
Did you see Mickey Mouse on the stage?
Great. Investigation into the fatal shooting of Eula Love by 2 Los Angeles police officers, it has been determined that the evidence does not warrant the filing of criminal charges. Today, I have ordered released the 37-page report with an appendix added with various supporting documents which details the work that our Special Investigative Division has put into this case and which summarizes many of the interviews that were conducted. Over 52 of them were involved in this case, and a number of other people were at least summarily questioned to find out whether or not they knew anything about it. In the summary, on pages 3 and 4 of the report that's been handed to you, the report concludes that there is no legal or evidentiary basis for murder charges because the evidence shows the killing was in self-defense. nor will involuntary manslaughter charges lie, according to the report, because the officer's conduct falls short of being the aggravated, reckless, and grossly negligent act condemned by statute and by case law. As I indicated to you, over 52 persons have been interviewed in the course of the investigation. Starting on page 12, the report outlines the testimony of 10 eyewitnesses to the shooting of Mrs. Love on January 3rd, 1979, outside her home. One of those witnesses is relatively new to you because until recently he was not known. He first came to our attention some while ago. He'd refused to tell his story to the Los Angeles Police Department and at first did not want to talk to us. But we decided to have him subpoenaed before the grand jury. He testified there and later was interviewed by our office. That's Mr. Ronald Lewis, and I'll talk about him in just a minute. I'd like to go over with you right now what I think is the most critical testimony of the case. That is those who saw the shooting. And if you go to your report, as I am going to do right now, to pages 16 and 19, I would just like to go through those witnesses with you to give you, in a sense, a feel for the most critical events in this case. Page 16 starts off on the bottom with the so-called officer's report, which I will not elaborate on at this time. We'll get back to that in a few minutes. Gas company people. This step on the knife at Mrs. Love, now it might be well to just take a look behind Terry at the, in a sense, at this Mrs. Hazel Blue. And I'm not exactly sure where she would be located on this map, but I believe that she would probably be shoulder same height as her head. Mrs. Blue further stated that when Mrs. Love started to move her right arm back, that was the knife that was recovered. She stood up, holding the knife in her right hand with the elbow bent and the knife pointing upwards. It was news media people who were out there who had taken a look at the area. We've talked to all the witnesses in the neighborhood. We have used the grand jury device here to get people in who we thought had percipient testimony. And I think the overwhelming weight of the evidence exonerates the officers.
Why didn't you use the grand jury process in the first place?
What are you talking about?
Well, I think what the officers did when they got there and their approach is certainly raised an issue in this case. And I think that's an issue for the city council, the police department, the police commission.
Mr. Garrity?
Excuse me.
But why do you think the officers were justified in pursuing this very hostile, irrational person? Why was it necessary for them to try to disarm her at that moment when no one else, the report states that the children were not feared to be in danger in the house? So why was it necessary at that time that they act?
That's something that you can only speculate on because the officers have not spoken directly to us. They have sent a letter in to us through their attorney, which indicated they were concerned about the kids. But we do know that the officers had information relating to the prior assault of the gas company employee on the premises at, I think, 11 o'clock or 11:15 that day. The woman was exhibiting a weapon, a dangerous weapon, in a threatening manner that probably would fall within the definition of Section 417 of the Penal Code. In all likelihood would have the right, because they were there, they saw it, to make an arrest. Now that's all speculation, but I think it's pretty clear they had a right to be there, and you just stated some of the reasons.
You have, so far, the most...
Question, though, our viewers say that here is a woman with a knife, and she's shot by two officers. What do you want to get across tonight?
Well, all I'm getting across today is that we reviewed the evidence, and the evidence establishes, on the weight of the evidence, would establish that she was throwing the knife at one of the officers, and they were acting out of self-defense, and they have a right to act out of self-defense. She had a serious weapon that could have caused serious, grave injury to one of the officers, and that they acted very quickly in response to that.
What kind of holes do you think you could plug in your investigation if you were able to talk?
There are not that many discrepancies as to whether the officers felt they were in danger. As I said, and if you read carefully, it could have happened that the knife that was thrown It could have killed one of them. Now,
Given the
are you
discrepancy-
are you telling me, your question was a loaded question with reaching, decisions that you have made privately yourself or publicly, I guess. Are you saying that they do not have the right to use deadly force when they're confronted by the same?
You have the responsibility of making that decision. Now, given the discrepancies and major differences in what those witnesses said according to your report, do you feel that a jury hearing cross-examination
Although the district attorney concluded there was no evidence warranting the filing of criminal charges, he did say there were some tactical and strategic questions about the way the officers handled the case, and they could only be answered by the police department. Stan Chambers from South Los Angeles for News at 10. Are you rolling? This is where Mrs. Eula Love stood on January 3rd. She had a knife in her hand. There was an officer here, another officer there. They repeatedly told her to get rid of the knife. There was a scuffle,